Hey everyone. So I've recently found myself with a whole lot of free time on my hands, and I've been using a whole lot of it to read the news. Like a lot of news. And there's a lot going on right now that I'd really like to share my thoughts on. From the way that Trump absolutely blew his response to the coronavirus, to how certain groups of states are banding together to create what I like to call the United States. I just wish someone had thought of that before. But before all that, I wanted to cover something you've probably heard of if you turn the news on at all lately.
What we call the new normal.
New normal.
The new normals.
The new normal is going to be very different from the old normal.
We obviously can't live on lockdown forever, but we also can't just return to unrestricted public life until we have a vaccine. The new normal is what life is going to look like until a vaccine is developed and widely distributed. So I wanted to talk about what that's going to look like and what steps we need to take before we can move past complete lockdowns, because it looks like it's going to be at least a year and a half before we get the vaccine.
Say what?
And that's my cousin Graham. I know informational videos can lose people pretty quickly, so I've asked him to step in as my audience in case what I say either gets too dry or just doesn't make any sense.
I am so tired of everything being closed. I need to be able to blame somebody for this. Obama's fault? Probably. Can't we just go to a bar or something this weekend?
Okay, I know it's tempting to think about this situation in black and white, like everything's going to be closed or open. This is either no one's fault or definitely Obama's. But many things in life have gray areas, and this is no different. Instead of just snapping our fingers and going back to normal life one day, we're going to see more of a slow but steady reopening, with certain shops and restaurants coming back in phases. And to get an idea of how that would work, we can look at countries like South Korea and Germany that have already begun their phased reopenings. Both countries are already reopening their schools. They just have social distancing guidelines in place, like having desks 6 feet apart. They're also beginning to open some shops and restaurants. They just have some regulations in place, like limiting the amount of people in at any given time and plastic separators at the checkout counters.
So why can't the US do this now? I haven't seen live sports in like a month.
Unfortunately, the US has a long way to go before we're really ready to follow in their footsteps. South Korea and Germany both took this a lot more seriously from the start than we did. That allowed them to get it under control before it got out of hand. South Korea, for example, actually had its first case of the coronavirus the same day as the United States. But while it only took them 1 week to test 60,000 people, it took the US 3 weeks to do the same.
To be honest, I wasn't really paying attention, but I don't see why that matters. Don't we have a drug that helps out with this kind of disease? Can't we just skip all this testing and use what we got?
Well, no. You're probably thinking of
Hydroxychloroquine.
some early studies did show that it could have the potential to help, but other studies are showing that it could hurt us or even kill us in some cases. So we don't have a cure right now. And if we begin phased reopenings before we get the virus under control, we're gonna see a massive swell in new cases. Remember, we just passed 1 million cases in the United States with the lockdown in place. Before we can start phase 1 of reopening, experts say we need to see things like a declining amount of new cases for 14 straight days and a complete end to cases amongst healthcare workers. But the 3 most important things that experts tend to agree we need to do are testing, contact tracing, and isolating the sick. First, let's talk about testing. In order to stop the spread of the disease, first we need to know who actually has it. Up to 80% of people who get the coronavirus don't show any symptoms, so they can be spreading it without even knowing it. Before we can get to phase 1 of reopening, experts say that we need to start testing between 5 and 700,000 people a day. Then, for the larger scale reopenings across the country, they say we're going to need to ramp it up to around 20 million a day.
Fake news. 20 million a day? Come on.
It's definitely quite a lot. And by comparison, we're only conducting about 150,000 tests a day right now. Those numbers make sense though, because people could easily be exposed to the coronavirus after testing negative for it. There's 330 million people in this country. And to prevent the spread, we're gonna have to test and retest them regularly. Right now, because there's a shortage, we're severely restricting who can get a test. As a result, about 20% of Americans who get tested have the coronavirus. By comparison, that number is 7% in Germany and only 3% in South Korea.
America first. We're number 1.
Actually, we want that number to be lower, not higher. The World Health Organization recommends that no more than 10% of tests come back positive before countries start to reopen. The other thing we're going to need to do is ramp up contact tracing. To help us understand exactly what that means, let's say, for example, that Graham tests positive for the coronavirus.
What?
Sorry, man. Once Graham tests positive, he's going to get a phone call from a contact tracer. That contact tracer is going to ask him about everyone he's been in touch with over the last few weeks to try and figure out not only where he got it, but also who he may have spread it to. Once that information's been collected, Graham's going to need to isolate himself for a couple of weeks to prevent spreading it further. And honestly, thank God, I could kind of use a break from him.
Hey!
From there, the contact tracer is going to reach out to anyone that he may have exposed. Those people will get tested, and if their results come back positive, the cycle starts all over again. As of right now, the United States employs about 7,300 contact tracers across different state and local governments. But experts say that we're probably going to need between 100 and 300,000 of them, so we have a long way to go.
Am I gonna be okay?
You don't actually have the coronavirus, Graham.
But how do you know that?
That's a good question, actually. Technically, I have no idea. Maybe you should just isolate yourself for a couple of weeks to be safe.
But I'm staying at your house!
Well, that actually brings us to our next point. God, I love a good transition. Isolating people who get the coronavirus presents its own challenge. If people who test positive for the coronavirus just go home, they could be putting their families or roommates at risk. To combat that problem in China, they retrofitted gyms and community centers with hospital beds so people with mild cases of the disease could go there to recover. Planet Fitness tends to be empty anyways, so we could do the same thing here. And that's pretty much it. With enough testing, contact tracing, and isolating the sick, we can start to embrace the new normal. Shops, bars, and restaurants can begin to reopen with social distancing guidelines in place. And with testing ramped up, we'll be able to keep track of how this affects new cases. If we do it right, we're not going to see any massive resurgence of cases, and we'll be able to continue to reopen more aspects of life, slowly but surely. If we do it wrong, we'll see a massive surge in new cases, and we could have to start the lockdown all over again. It's better for us to take this slow and get it right than to do it fast and have to start over.
And Trump's on top of that, right?
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
Let's save that for another video.